At his father. You are tired from the hard climb up the mountain. Go bathe, then you can sleep. We'll talk tomorrow. So Soxy went down to the little trickle of the spring and got cleaned up and tried to lay down. He felt better after his bath and went to his sleeping mat. But in spite of his weariness, he found it hard to sleep. His mind went back to the terrible moment on the path, and he recalled, for just an instant, his heart had gone out to the God of heaven. He hadn't wanted to. He hated the God of heaven. Yet in his fright, and he had almost turned to him. Almost. Perhaps in his heart, he really had called on God, the God of Rajan. Then came the light in the path, and his father's voice calling his name. Could the God of heaven answer so quickly? He felt prickly all over, and his heart beat fast. He twisted and turned on his mat. When he did fall asleep, he woke up often. Tunes of songs rippled through his head that Rajan had taught them. The next morning, Kuning came to visit. Peaceful morning, he could hear his father, Paku, saying. I have a good thought, the witch doctor said, coming in and settling on him the mat. Our son has come home. His yellow teeth, can you picture him? Shouldn't we have a little celebration in his honor? You have some fine rice wine, and I have some. We could make a little feast and have some dancing and music. The boy will feel that we are so glad he is home. That's a fine idea, Paku said. What do you think, Soxy? The boy nodded. I have been looking forward to our parties. There has not been anything like that in Singing Water for a long time. Kuning shook his head in sadness. That's too bad. That abominable teaching, it spoils everything. He stomped his foot and shook his fist. We will keep all the old customs lively here in this village. Perhaps some of the people of Singing Water will move up here and get away from that god teacher. Kuning was a small man, old and kind of dried out like a green fruit that had laid in the sun too long. His hair was thin and a little gray, and his nose stood up from his face more than usual, and it was sharper and more than the ordinary nose, and his yellow teeth were loose and they clattered when he talked fast or became excited. He was kind of a restless fellow, and his hands were always working and twisting and waving about. Kuning talked a lot. He knew everyone's business, and nothing in the village happened without his supervision. There was a peculiar glittering quality about his eyes. They were not bright or clear. Years of drinking had taken any of the freshness out of his expression, but there was something sharp and sly about them. Soxy looked into Kuning's eyes as he spoke. Do you think if you went to the village of Singing Water, you could persuade Uncle Sobat and Aunt Gar to stop going to the teacher's house? I already talked to them, Sobat. To Sobat. The old man waved his hands and shook them about. I talked to him, and he answered that he will hear all about the new teaching first. Then he will decide. At sundown a couple days later, all the preparations were in place for their evening party. They started passing the rice wine around. Drums were playing. People started to dance and get drunk. In a little bit, somebody brought Soxy a coconut full of the liquor. He said, people are watching me. I got to drink it, you know. He had normally only had a little bit. So here he goes. Downs the whole thing. Ooh. Immediately, his stomach realized that was a mistake. He got up and ran out behind his father's hut and violently disposed of said drink. He lay on the ground rolling around. Oh, he could still hear the music, and everyone was getting quite rowdy. Finally, he got up and felt better enough to walk back into where everyone else was. Then he started thinking, Maybe this is loud enough that people in Singing Water could hear. Yeah, they could hear and see how much fun we're having. And he realized, nope, they can't hear. They're all in Teacher Rajan's house singing their own music. They wouldn't hear this at all. The boy was startled by his own thoughts. Where was the gladness in this feast? The gladness, he remembered. Where is the happiness of this group of villagers gathered under the stars and the coconut palms, drinking and making this frightful racket? This was not what he had expected, not like his memories. Something must be wrong. As the night advanced, people got more and more drunk, getting crazy, and an argument broke out. It was between the chief of Broken Light and his son, Jawab. Not sure what they were arguing about. Jawab was about 16. They started wobbling to their feet and arguing, and their voices got louder and louder. It was impossible to even understand what the quarrel was about. But then they started screaming at each other and started throwing punches and fighting and pushing. The struggle got so fierce, it came over to where Soxy was sitting, and he stood up to move out of their way. Everybody knew that Jawab would be chief one day. He was quick and slender and very strong, but his father was much stockier and heavy and had great strength. The two wrestlers dragged and pushed and clawed at each other. Cooning the witch skip something. The two wrestlers dragged and pushed and clawed each other, and they were coming closer to where Soxy was. And all of a sudden, in a burst of fury, the chief threw his son down onto the ground, and Jawab screamed out in terrible pain, "Ah!" Cooning the witch doctor hurried over to him. One leg stuck out from his side in a grotesque angle. It seemed to be unjointed at the hip. The young man was in frightful pain. He screamed in agony for several minutes in spite of his mother trying to calm him down. Then he lapsed into unconsciousness. After all, he was drunk. The old chief sank down exhausted on the ground. It was plain that he had no idea what had happened. He, too, was filled with rice wine, and he began to snore. On the trampled grass in the moonlight, the chief lay there beside his son, Jawab. The women gathered around and looked at Jawab's terribly injured leg. They began to wail and grieve because they all knew Jawab was the only living son of the chief and his wife. They had had 7 other children, but all of the others had died as babies. Now the chief's only son was gravely injured, and by his own father nonetheless, in a drunken fight. Cooning and Paku looked at each other. They had been drinking too, but not as much as the others, and realized what a dreadful thing had just happened. "Now what shall we do?" Paku asked the witch doctor. Cooning twisted his hands together in a frenzy of worry and fright. "Oh, he can never walk again," the witch man whispered. "Oh, it is the anger of the spirits. He can never be chief. Who ever saw the chief with a leg sticking out at an angle like that?" The young man moved in a just a little bit in his stupor. His breath came in dry snores, and he moaned with every breath. With Soxy's help, they moved him, Jawab, to his father's house, which was only a short distance away near the hut of Paku, and there they laid him on the mat. Soxy was left alone with Jawab for a moment, while the other 2 men went back to drag the chief back home. The boy stood looking down at Jawab. A strange thought crossed his mind. What about the god of Rajan? Could he help someone with trouble like this? No one in the village of Broken Light knew what to do. God. The thought of God frightened him. Where did it come from even? He felt sickness rising up in his stomach again. It must be almost morning, and there was light just starting to show over the mountains. When Kapu and Cooning dragged the chief to the mat in the same room, they came to stare at Jawab. Then Cooning hurried out the door. He had gone to fetch some of his charms, of course. "Father," Soxy told Paku and took his hand. It was cold and shaking. "Father." The words were forced because he almost didn't want to say them. "The teacher, Rajan, of Singing Water, he might know what to do." Paku looked at Soxy. Then he turned to see if Cooning might be lingering at the door. The trembling man fixed his eyes on his son. "You have been home only 3 days, and already you want to send for the god teacher?" There was anger in his face. "No, I don't want to, Soxy insisted, but I feel sorry for Jawab. It's hurting him so much. How can his leg get any better if it's not pulled back into straight again?" Paku did not answer. In a minute, Cooning had come into the room In one hand, he carried a dried crocodile, and in the other, a big bag of charms, and his face was dark with furies. "What's this you say?" He turned to Saxi, screaming to him in anger. "That leg will stay exactly like it is unless it goes back into place itself. We will not have that teacher coming in this village and spoiling all of our pleasures like he's done in Singing Water. No!" The chief's wife had called all her relatives now, and a crowd was beginning to gather. Saxi felt faint and ill. He slipped out the door and ran to his father's hut and threw himself on his sleeping mat. When he had wakened, it was broad daylight. The sun was halfway to the zenith, and he heard voices outside, voices that he recognized. Let's have a word of prayer. Now, you have to be here every morning if you want to hear the rest of the story. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to be here together and hearing of ways that you have answered and done amazing things in the past and in the present. Be with us today. Be with all the activities that are going on, all the seminars that will be presented, Lord. May each one of us internalize what you have for us today. Thank you. In thy name, amen.
So the seminars and all the things are going to start. We'll clear up. We'll have our Bible marking here at 11 o'clock, then our cooking school this afternoon in here. But looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless and have a good day.